Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us at the Zedek Adult Learning Program. My name is Brahm Canzer, and I'm online with Rabbi Alan W. Today, our discussion will focus on the events surrounding COVID-19 and how it might be impacting Judaic thinking. The rabbi and myself have exchanged emails. We've discussed this a little bit on by telephone and Zoom, and we thought it would be a good idea to begin today's session, which is, what is today's date? It's the April 2nd, 2020, and to set the timeline for this. So let's begin. And I think one of the first questions that I thought about and wanted to hear your feedback, your thoughts about, is how you think the pandemic is impacting on Judaic thinking. And maybe you can begin by talking about your frame of reference of what Judaic thinking is, and then respond to the question, which is how is this impacting on how Jews are thinking about Judaic thinking, and what your thoughts are about that.
Well, firstly, thank you, Brahm, for setting this up today. And yes, there's a lot to discuss. The question that you ask, first and foremost, is that with what's going on in the world, it has the ability to bring out the worst and the best in each and every one of us, the way we interact, the way we think, the way we plan. Yeah, so what I'm finding with respect to colleagues, Jewish colleagues, not only here in Montreal, but around the world, that this pandemic is bringing out the best in modern, traditional thoughts. So what do I mean by that? Well, my experience is that rabbis from across the religious divides are realizing that we cannot allow a distance to divide us. They are recognizing what it means to have people locked in their homes, separated from family, where loneliness rains down on a daily basis. And so they've gone out of their way, in most cases, to use any form that's available to them, including technology, which is something new in many communities. You know, for some rabbis, the use of technology for religious services was a no-brainer. It's something that they easily accepted, and they've done it for a while. It's not that new. However, for other rabbis, such as myself, the use of technology for religious services requires the overcoming of beliefs and traditions, trying to find a leniency that heretofore would never have entered into the discussion. And that is not an easy thing. And in the meetings that I've had with leaders from across the Jewish leaders across the divide, people are struggling with it. And in most cases, they found a way to, even if we don't agree ideologically and theologically, they found a way of making it work. So I see very positive outcomes in Judaic thought.
I think also related to this, just as my own feedback, is that the Judaic thinking is all about community, and agreed, the religious practice is continuing through technology and the use of technology. Beyond that, I see with many of the friends and groups that I associate with, the continuation, using technology to maintain that sense of community, which is also at the heart of Judaism. People that we go biking with in Florida, people that are the men's club and so on, the community within the synagogue. That spirit of community, which is at the heart of Judaism, to me, I think it's interesting, is coming out. It's being practiced still, and I think that's obviously something to be noted as well.
I agree with you. Somebody said, and I think it's very true, that today it's the distance that unites us. Which is quite interesting, and I think a lot of us rabbis have realized this. And to keep that community viable and together, we've had to think outside of the box.
I wonder what your thoughts are about your knowledge about rabbis in general, their feelings about how this will impact without question, we're living through a life-changing event. And the longer it goes on and how we hopefully return very quickly to what was normal before, however long that takes, it's going to have in my opinion, a progressive buildup. And then we're going to have to deal with how that has changed us. What are the rabbis in general, not from a religious point of view, but from a social point of view, thinking? Is this going? Are there opinions being circulated about how this is likely to change our behavior socially or among our own smaller communities?
It's a point that we're all grappling with, because what was. There is no rolling back. So in other words, because the use of technology has been embraced by the populace, and in my own congregation, I'm just blown away at the ease at which a lot of the older members of the congregation have embraced technology and are joining services morning and evening. The numbers have gone through the roof. And whether we like it or not, you can't roll that back. You can't take that away from people. When this is all over, how are we going to be able to say to people who are stuck at home for whatever reason, maybe they're elderly, they're unable to get out, that they no longer can participate in the service because we're not doing this anymore, we're going back to the way it was? There is no going back to the way it was. So the question is going to be, is how do we integrate what we have learned and what we have experienced into a new norm? And what that's going to look like, I don't think anybody can really say at the moment. I think it's evolving on a daily basis, and it certainly will be very different than what it was.
Okay. How, in your opinion, should we approach this time? I hesitate to use the term existential, but I will. So I'll phrase it this way. For some, it might be an existential threat. For others, it's a riddle about God's purpose and our own meaning in life, understanding our lives. What are your thoughts about that? Is this God's communication with mankind? Is this another call from the mountain? Is this, we're all associating this with Passover, and, there are lots of jokes floating around about, Pesach has been canceled by a plague. There's irony in that. And what are your thoughts about the way this is impacting on us?
So first and foremost, Pesach hasn't been cancelled. It might look very different than what we've done in the past, but it certainly hasn't been cancelled. But you bring up a very important question. I actually just saw a headline a few minutes ago where it says that 30% of people think that what is going on is a message from God to force us to change, and it's an existential threat to the future. And I got to tell you, I don't believe for 1 second the current situation is an existential threat to mankind as a whole. And I really derive that from the book of Genesis, the story of Noah. So, what happened in the story of Noah? The story of Noah was such that God promised not to once again destroy the earth, the world, after the flood. And I got to tell you something, as a believer in God, I trust that he's going to keep his word and not destroy the world. So I don't believe it's an existential threat. And I also feel that in times like this, people have to point a finger. Rather than saying that perhaps we are the cause of this, they've got to point to God. And, poor God's probably looking down and saying, I gave you the perfect world, and now you've messed it all up. You're going to blame me? No, I don't think so. I think he's probably just watching in amazement at what we've actually done, the mess we've got ourselves into, and how the heck we're going to get out of it. But it's going to be very painful. There's no question. It is painful now. It's not going to be. It is. But we will get through it. As I said in one of my other recordings, Gam ze ya'avor, this too will pass. And the thing that concerns me is that we'll come out the other side of this, and what will we have actually learned from it? How will we change our lives? How will we be impacted on a long-term basis? Hopefully, l'tova, for the better.
My comment to you about what you're saying is that I don't see this as an existential threat, but I do see it as a message, something to pause and to think about. And there are lots of parallels with biblical passages, and
absolutely,
yeah. And I think for me, it's putting aside all the negative that is taking place, obviously, I think people, I hope, will come out of this stronger, with a better sense of their connection to their fellow man, a better sense of judgment of what's important in life. Because for the first time for many people, this is like a complete social shutdown. Mm-hmm. And our communication is more thought out. We have to compose emails and text messages and FaceTime and this sort of thing. And we're taking our time to connect with people that are important, and the things that are not important have been put away. So I think we're going to feel that effect. I know that I will afterwards. And I feel different already. I'm actually ready for reintegration to normal life, as much as that will take place afterwards on a gradual basis. But I think that the impact of this has been on a spiritual level, has been a very positive one for me and for many people that I know.
I think we have to look. We can always tie up stories from biblical passages to fit what it is we need them to fit. We've got to be careful when we do that, remembering when those, and I'm not talking about Torah passages, I'm talking about more prophetic passages, the time they were written and the situation that the prophet was in at the time that they were being written. There are parallels, there's no question. I always like to try and tie back to the Torah, and I think something that you've said is very important, because if we go back to the story of Noah, there are two stories that occurred in that one section of the Torah, and that was, of course, the destruction of the world by God through way of flood, and the other was the Tower of Babel. Now, two stories come in the same section, but they give us a very different message. And if we look at it, the in-depth story of the Tower of Babel, we see clearly that God's preference and the message that we were getting from God is that relationship with your fellow man is primary, even over your relationship with God. And I think that's one of the things, as you quite rightly point out, that this pandemic is doing. It's causing us to reevaluate our relationship with our fellow man. And hopefully when this is all over, it will continue in becoming stronger and stronger, and less about ourselves, but more about community.
Okay, good point. So I'd like to maybe conclude with a question that we discussed in advance, and leave it to you to explain. What would you hope we would take away, and maybe to some extent to follow up on what you just said, what would you hope we would take away that would make our lives more meaningful, more Jewish, more specifically more Jewish? How can we create a more Jewish identity? And maybe to phrase it this way, can we become more Jewish in our identity by learning from what we're going through these days?
You know, I'm not quite sure what it means when you say become more Jewish, perhaps more aware, but it's no secret that for decades, Jewish organizations have worried, and indeed continue to worry, that the disengagement in general, and the youth in particular, is only getting worse and worse. So based on my social feeds and certainly the social feeds of my colleagues, I think it's just because that we're in a pandemic that I believe that people have now found a reason why they want to turn back and look for something that's more than just themselves. In what's going on, despite this extended separation, I see a deeper intimacy in the interactions with congregants and with people in general, the way people are speaking to one another, the way they're concerned for one another. You know, when I log on to our daily minyanim, you know, we have morning and evening minyanim. You know, there's a thrill, there's an absolute thrill that runs through me as I come face to face with a lit up screen of people who have decided that that's where they want to be at this time, in a group of like-minded people. You know, each of us is, you know, our spirituality is finding new meaning. And our spirituality, I find today, is not, if not physically directed eastward, each of us is perhaps not in the Torahic description of closeness, but we are what's called panim el panim, which literally means face to face. And I think there can be no closer connection than being panim el panim, face to face. I mean, look at us now. We're actually looking directly at one another. Yes, it is through a medium of technology. So in the face of COVID-19, something is happening that's got people involved again. You know, as community spaces close, I mean, one after the other, you know, we're all closed, okay? The doors of communication are actually opening. Yes, they're looking very different. They're appearing online, you know, and, you know, Judaism is accessible today for all who want it. And for those, and they don't have to get up and they don't have to drive however long to be part of it. They can be part of it right from in their own living room. So people have not attended service in years, perhaps just for the high holidays, now pop up on my screen. And screens across the world to be part of, or to be active participants in rituals that they had rejected as arcane, classes and workshops that they had little interest in their lives. They're now a part of it.
Yeah.
So I just hope that when this is all over, this will continue.
Mm-hmm. My guess is that it will. It'll probably stimulate a new kind of development, a hybrid type of development, a little bit more of both. That would be my thought at this point. Okay, so my concluding statement. Thank you, Rabbi Bright. And until next time, I'm Brahm Canzer for the Shara Zedek Adult Learning Program. Shalom.
Shalom, shalom.